through this evening a little talk about monitoring wildlife. So I'm going to talk about why it's so important that we record and monitor wildlife, and I'm going to talk about some of the recording schemes that are available, not all of them because there's loads, and then I'm just going to highlight some of the identification resources that are available to help you when you're kind of embarking on sort of wildlife monitoring and identifying different species. So I'm going to start with this little brown bird here, and some of you might recognise this bird, some of you may not, and that's totally fine. If hopefully you can hear that, maybe you can't, and if you can't, never mind, but if you can, you will start to hopefully recognise the lovely song. If you could switch your sound off, please, that would be really helpful.
Anyway, I'm going to put the sound through.
So that's the lovely Skylark singing there. So you should be hearing lots of that up on the downs at the moment. So I started with a skylark just as an example of a species that you might bump into, to think about really, so what do we know? What do we know when we see that bird? What do we know when we hear that bird? One of the things for me when I hear and see that bird, particularly when I hear it, is I know that spring is here. I know for sure that bird has got a hell of a lot of energy to be singing and flying at the same time. And I know that it's a very uplifting thing. You know, I think for me and for lots of people, skylarks are really, really an uplifting species to have around. But actually, what do I know when I hear that bird and I see that skylark displaying, so this top right-hand corner photo here, it actually tells me something else. It tells me that these are the male birds that are singing and that they're forming territory. So it tells me that actually there's a chance that this bird might be breeding here, which is fantastic. And if I see this thing at the bottom here, so a skylark with a mouthful of crane flies, I know something even more. I know that actually this bird has bred, this bird has got hungry chicks somewhere to feed. So I get even more information. And this is really important for lots of reasons. So I've used the skylark as an example because skylarks are one of a group of birds that we call sort of farmland birds. So 19 different species of birds that the British Trust for Ornithology have identified that are birds that feed in open farmland during their breeding season. And out of all of our bird species, so you can see a graph there from the 1970s, this is up to about 2018, this graph. Unfortunately, most of our birds have declined, and you can see the farmland birds as a group have declined the most since these sort of long-term data sets started in the late 60s, 1970. So 58% decline. So actually, noticing where the skylarks are, noticing where the skylarks are singing is really important because you're helping to build up this picture. And actually seeing that skylark there, this is one of our red listed birds. So unfortunately, because it's declined as a species by 51%, it's now on what's called a bird of conservation concern red list. So seeing that one bird means a lot of things. Birds are really fantastic indicator species, and actually, you know, gathering this sort of data is really important about understanding more widely what's going on in our countryside. So biological recording, really all we're doing is going out and getting information about what's going on in the countryside. So we're gathering data about different species. Why does that matter? For loads and loads of different reasons. So as an ecologist, it's really important for me to understand what's going on, to understand sort of patterns. If I'm recommending management to a landowner, it's really important for me to understand what species are there, to understand how the management that I'm recommending is affecting those species. So it's allowing you, this sort of biological data set that you gather is allowing you to assess these changes. It's also really important in terms of providing this conservation alert system, so that better information we have, the more data that we have, the more tuned we are into what's going on, and the more that we can detect early when things might be going wrong for a particular species. And also, really importantly, it provides what's called a baseline. So your first sort of surveys that you undertake are basically setting this baseline for yourself, and then you can go back and monitor afterwards. So they're really important at the beginning of a project, so you actually have something to compare towards. And I think as well, biological recording is also really important from the point of view of connection with nature. I think the more you're going out spending time in nature, actually taking the time to watch things like skylarks, to watch what they're doing, to notice that they've got a mouthful of crane flies, all of the time that you're doing that and just sharing a little bit of their day with them, you're connecting with them. It's really good for your well-being, and hopefully it's really helping you to appreciate these species that you're cohabiting space with. So what is a biological record? This is one of my biological records here. It's really very straightforward. There are 4 key bits of information. The first one is who recorded it, so that was me. So sometimes you'll also have a determiner, that was also me in this case, but sometimes you might want a little bit of help. It's really important that when this biological record goes in, that it has a person's name attached to it, because if there are any queries, the county recorder will know who to go back to ask for more information. The next thing that you record is what you actually see. So this is a yellow-legged mining bee, and Andrena flavipes is its scientific name. So every species will have a scientific name. Some of them will have a common name, some of them won't. The more specific you can get in terms of what you've seen, the better. So if you can isolate it to a species, that's fantastic. But I would say, and I will kind of come back to this point later on, is just classify what you've seen to a level that you're confident with. If you can only recognize it as a bee, that's totally fine. If you can recognize that it's a mining bee, but you're not sure which one, that's fine too. If you can take it further, that's great, but don't kind of feel like you're less of a recorder or less of a person because you don't know exactly what that species is. And it's also really good to take photos, and this can help you to ask for help, get help from other people. So the next thing that you need to know is where. It's obviously incredibly important that we know where you saw this thing. So this bee I saw in Hurstpierpoint. So you can see the 10-metre square there. So by the bus stop in Hurstpierpoint, where there's a lovely nesting bank of these species. And the more accurate, the more specific you can get with your location, again, the better. So these 8-figure grid references are 10-metre squares, whereas if I'd only given a 4-figure grid reference, that would have been a 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre square, which is useful, but it's not so useful. And then the final bit of information is when. When did you see it? And this is really important for lots of reasons. So actually, from the point of view of verifying your record, it's really important, because actually if I had said that I'd seen this bee in December, someone would have probably said, I don't think that's right, can we have a little look again at your record? So again, if you can provide the actual date rather than the year, that's really fantastic. And you'll be pleased to hear there are some biological recording bonus points up for grabs. So I would definitely say try and take a photo if you can, especially if it's a species that you're not quite so confident with, because this is really going to help with the verification. So each kind of group of animals, so birds, plants, moths, for example, have all got a county recorder, and they will basically look at all of those records. And if there's something they just want a little bit more information, or they just want to check, then a photo is incredibly useful for them. Also, if you can gather data, additional data to those 4 things that I told you, so the number that you saw, the sex, if you know, it's not always possible to tell, but for some species, the males and the females look different, and also the life stage. So you may have seen a large white caterpillar feasting on your brassicas, or you may have seen a large white adult butterfly, and actually just making that distinction is useful too. And you'll see those things potentially at slightly different times of the year. So I'm really going to encourage you, when you're putting records in, to go for information overload. So my example here, we're back to that beautiful skylark. It's really useful to know that somebody saw a skylark in 2020 in Hurstpierpoint in that 1 kilometre square. That's nice. It's nice to know that that bird's around. But actually, if you go a little bit more specific and say that, well, it was on the 31st of May and I saw it in Hurst Meadows within this 100-metre square, and you know what, it was carrying a mouthful of crane flies, that record has suddenly become a lot more powerful, because that what that's telling you is that actually skylarks are breeding here. that's, you know, that's really useful information from a conservation point of view, from a management point of view. But I'm going to caveat by saying, don't guess at what you don't know. Just put the information in that you do know, because actually it's really clear that you're recording what you see, but not kind of necessarily second guessing what it means. It's kind of the people that will be then using the data that comes back out the other side that will be sort of looking and trying to analyze it. So just put in what you do know, then you know that your records are accurate. You know, don't kind of try and think, oh, what does it mean that I've seen this thing? So how do you submit records? There's loads and loads of different ways to do this. If you haven't come across Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre before, they're a really fantastic organisation. We're incredibly lucky to have them. They live at Sussex Wildlife Trusts. They're a separate organisation in their own right, but they basically hold and disseminate all of the biodiversity records in the county. One of their preferred ways of receiving your records is through something called iRecord. So you can either use that on a website, or if you've got a smartphone and you're a kind of fan of apps, then you can download an iRecord app, and you can use that when you're out in the field. So you can bring up a map and press on your phone exactly where you've seen something. So that's a really lovely, and I'll show you iRecord in a second. You could use an Excel spreadsheet, and there's a couple of other programs you can use, Recorder, MapMate, or you can use good old-fashioned pen and paper. There's lots of different ways that you do it, but I would just really encourage you to really think about submitting biological records, because they're super important. So iRecord, this is from my iRecord account. So the really nice thing about iRecord is it actually gives you effectively your own database of what you've seen that you can then go back and look at later. So I could go and look, for example, at that yellow-legged mining bee and say, well, when do I usually see them? Or I could look at things like hedgehog and say, well, where have I seen hedgehogs in Sussex? This is where I've seen hedgehogs in Sussex. So that's all really useful information. But because I've submitted it into Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, other people can see that information too. And that's really important for lots of different reasons. So where does the data go? So as I said, it's held by Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, but that data is made available for lots of people to use. So there's just a few examples here for you. So that data is used to inform things like the wonderful butterflies of Sussex, the birds of Sussex, the plants of Sussex, the dragonflies of Sussex, all these species atlases that we're working on. Those in turn are informing conservation activity, so they're really important. There's also, the Record Centre does a lot of what's called opportunity mapping. So they actually use information about habitats and species to look at where would be the best places to create new wetlands, where would be the best places to create new meadows. And through that, again, it helps to focus conservation management and conservation effort, because unfortunately, there's still not enough money that goes into conservation of the natural environment. So this is really important. As I said, you're in a kind of feedback loop with biodiversity data. So the more data you have, the more records you have, the more you understand what the management you're doing, what effect it's having. And it also provides really good conservation evidence. So on the right here is a picture of one of the ecological data searches, just the front cover of the report. So Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre give out lots of data searches every year for lots of different reasons. So for people who want to manage their site for wildlife, but also when sites are being assessed for planning, for example. So again, it's incredibly important to have as much data as possible, because although an ecologist will be going to that site and should be making a very thorough assessment of what's there, it's also very, you know, as an ecologist, it's much more useful to get people's data than somebody sat at home stewing that a planning application's gone in when they've seen X, Y, and Z there, but they haven't told anybody else. So it is super, super important to get those records in. And then it also leads us on to monitoring. So the more information that we have over time, the more it kind of gives us, it makes us able to see these long-term patterns. And the reason I'm using a house sparrow here is because when I'm out bird ringing, one of my colleagues from bird ringing, who's a little bit older than me, said to me once that people never used to record house sparrows because house sparrows were so common. Well, actually now house sparrows have declined 71% since the late 70s. So actually if you're not recording these things, you can miss potentially, you can't, or you don't notice things happening quickly, you can't react to them as well. So for house sparrows, for example, we kind of understand why they're declining in farmland, but actually we're still trying to understand exactly what's happening to them in sort of urban and suburban areas. And biological recording is really important for this. So trying to work out for the sparrows, for example, is it to do with loss of food? Is it to do with loss of nesting sites? All these different things. And biological recording really helps with this. And as again, to go back to the slightly depressing graph there, but again, the more data you get, the more you have these more accurate, more reliable long-term pictures across groups. So like I said, farmland birds we know are declining the most, and that's really important then for actually identifying, well, what are the really critical things that we can do, which species do we need to study more to understand, so we can actually start to try and prevent any further decline and actually reverse it. So there's lots of sort of ecologists that are working, there's lots of sort of big science that's going on to try and conserve these species and to understand the patterns behind declines. But as with anything, the more data that goes in, the better the information that comes out, the more information there is to analyse and to increase our understanding. And there are loads and loads of recording schemes. This is not all of them, this is just a selection of some of the recording schemes that are available for anybody to get involved in. So I'm just going to go through a few of them with you, just to hopefully give you some ideas of where you could get started, a few sort of groups to get started with, a little bit about the schemes, and then, like I said, a few tips on identification resources for you to go and have a look at. So I'm going to start with birds, because that is a group that people really enjoy watching. Birds are fantastic indicator species. We know a lot about their ecology. They're found across lots of different habitats. They've got different diets, different niches, so different ways that they live their lives, and they're relatively easy to study, and they're relatively easy to observe. They're not always so easy to identify, but that is, I promise, just practice. So there's several different bird surveys, sort of citizen science surveys that you can see there that you can become involved with. So the first one I'm sure you've heard of is Big Garden Birdwatch. It's basically just counting the birds in your garden for 1 hour. So I'm afraid there is some bad news at this point, because if this is news to you, this survey, you're going to have to wait quite a while to get involved with it, because it only takes place one weekend every year. So the bad news is you've just missed it. It was at the end of January. However, the really good news is that if you liked Big Garden Birdwatch, if you enjoyed being involved in that, then you're going to really love Garden Birdwatch, which really should be called maybe Bigger Garden Birdwatch, because actually this is something that you can do every single week. So it's basically spending maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, creating a list of species that are visiting your garden every week. So this is actually run by the British Trust for Ornithology. And again, if you haven't heard of them, if you are interested in birds or interested in conservation and have maybe a spare £50 a year, I can thoroughly recommend becoming a member. They're a really fantastic organisation. They do great research. Their Garden Birdwatch is usually run as a sort of membership scheme. I think it's something like £15 a year, and they give you lots of support, a magazine and a book to help with your sort of garden bird watching endeavours. But over the course of the lockdown, it has been free, so I'm assuming it still is. But even if it's not, it's a good investment of a little bit of money, and actually for lots of support and supporting a great organisation that's working for bird conservation. So that's a really cool thing you can do. Another one that's run by BTO is this Garden Wildlife Health, and that's really just asking people to report any sort of sick wildlife that they're finding in their garden. So it can be birds, it can also be amphibians, because unfortunately there are several sort of diseases out there that can be transmitted, and often in gardens where animals are kind of encouraged to congregate together. So particularly if you're feeding birds in your garden, it's really, really important to keep your feeders clean, because actually this is a place where these diseases for birds can transmit. So things like scaly leg that you get in various finches. So if you are seeing birds that look a little bit lethargic, or you've noticed they've got kind of big lumpen legs, BTO are asking you to report that. And then there's another scheme that they started last year, I think, which is called Nesting Neighbours, where they're asking people to monitor birds nesting in their garden if they've got a nest box, or if they happen across, say, a robin nesting in the shed, for example. It is something that needs to be done very respectfully and very carefully, but it can be incredibly useful to get that information about nesting birds, because actually the success of birds' nests is a really kind of critical factor for them as well. So all of these schemes are, you know, are there to kind of be entered into and to be enjoyed. And then another one for when you're away from home, I mean, you can do it at home, but also on your walks. There's an app called Bird Track, and you can basically make a list of all of the species that you see when you're bird watching, or when you're just wandering around. You don't have to specifically be bird watching. You don't have to be pressured to record every single thing. If there's something you see and you're not quite sure what it is, like I said, don't guess. I mean, have a guess, but don't submit a record if you're not sure. So you can basically say, this is a complete list of everything I saw, or this is a partial list. It's all really useful information. So that kind of leads me on to, often with birds, we do get those kind of what the hell is that moments. I can't teach you to identify birds in one evening, but a few things to look out for, a few things to bear in mind when you're looking at a bird and just don't know where to start with it, is to consider these things. So think about the shape of it. So how long are its legs? How long is its beak? What shape is its beak? How long is its neck? What, you know, that's going to really help you work out the family, which will really help you narrow it down. So if you see something, lots of people have been noticing things like redwings around the area at the moment, so a type of thrush. They might not recognize it as a redwing, but they're probably looking at it thinking, that kind of looks like a song thrush. I'm not sure what it is, but you've already made your job much easier, because you've identified correctly that yes, that is a type of thrush. So that's going to really help you to narrow it down. With the birds, it's really useful to try and work out size. So just think of something you know, something you see a lot, you're really familiar with, like a starling perhaps, or a collared dove, and just kind of try in your mind's eye to compare it to that. And that will also help. Its behaviour, so is it sort of skulking alone, or is it hanging out with other birds? Is it sat out confidently in a tree, or is it skulking around on the ground somewhere? All of these things are just helping you to build a picture. And then the habitat as well. So this can be really important for particular species. There are quite cosmopolitan species that will go between different habitats, but there are other things that you'll generally only find in a woodland or a wetland, for example. And then also take a look at your calendar. What time of year is it? Because, you know, this time of year we're about to, we're about to be hit by an invasion. So there is basically an army working its way up from Africa right now of birds that are going to be with us for the summer. And so that's really exciting, but it's also really important, because actually, there's certain species you're only really going to see them in the summer, and other species like the redwings, for us, we're only going to see them in the winter and the early part of the spring. So that's a kind of key thing. There are vagrants that pop up, so you do get some nice surprises sometimes. And then the colours and the markings. So for this bird, it's brown, it's kind of dirty white underneath, but it's also got that lovely speckling. So that's kind of going to be a key feature. It's got that speckling on the forehead, it's got a black beak, it's got quite short dark legs. All of these things would be the things that I would be paying attention to, making notes of, and if I could, to take a photo to then go back to my field guide later, have a look through it and go, oh, I think that's a spotted flycatcher. So okay, you've got your photo, you've got your notes, but you're still like, oh, help, where can you go for more information? So there's some really fantastic books. So there's a couple of them here. I mean, there are loads of books for birds. If you're just starting off, I really recommend these these FSC guides. So this guide here down on the bottom. They're about £4 each, and they have an incredible amount of information for the size of them, and they're just really useful, just sort of easing your way into, and they produce them for everything, different groups of plants, different groups of animals. There's RSPB books. If you are somebody that knows you're quite interested in birds and you think you're probably going to perhaps spend time in other countries in Europe, then I would certainly recommend the Collins Bird Guide. It's fantastic, and you can also get it as an app which has the songs and the calls as well. Other places you can go for help, Again, the BTO have got some really good identification videos. The RSPB have got some useful information with bird calls on there. The Sussex Ornithological Society have got a really useful not a blog, whatever the other thing's called, sightings page. So you can kind of see what other people are seeing around about now, and that can give you some help as well. Sussex Wildlife Trust have had some really great events on birds, and they've got lots of useful information. They do courses about bird identification, and there's a website called Zeno Canto where you can look at bird songs and calls as well. So I'm going to look at a few of the butterfly and moth surveys that you could get involved with as well. So again, a few of those here that we'll talk about. So starting off with butterflies, there's a couple of different ones. So one of them is called the Wider Countryside Butterfly Survey. And this is basically a commitment of walking to what's called transects. So that's just a linear route. It's not a straight line, but it's a linear route. And they will typically be 1 kilometre long, and you record butterflies within a sort of 5-metre box around you. So as tempting as it is, if you see a clouded yellow, like this lovely clouded yellow here, sort of racing away, sort of 10 metres away from you, you don't record it on your transect. You can still put a record in, but you just stick to your window around yourself. And you can walk that during the sort of spring, summer months up to maybe 2, 3, 4 visits a year. There is something called a butterfly transect, which is a much bigger commitment. But actually, if you're just sort of time pressured, just doing this Wider Countryside Butterfly Survey can be great. And then also later in the year, so in the height of summer, during July, Butterfly Conservation organise every year this big butterfly count. And that's just basically, it's the butterfly equivalent of Big Garden Birdwatch. So you can go out for 15 minutes to wherever for a walk into your garden and just tally up all of the butterflies you're seeing of different species, and they can analyze that data. I should say, like, all of these things, like the butterfly monitoring programs have been going for decades, so there are really big data sets, so they can do really powerful analysis with this, and the more data they get, the better. So there's also something called Migrant Watch, which Butterfly Conservation, again, that's one of their projects. So there are certain species that these are not the only migrants by any means, but these are the two that they ask you to look out for, that they migrate to the UK every year. So they're not overwintering here. They're starting off in Europe or in Africa, and they're heading all the way up to the UK. So if you're seeing a hummingbird hawk moth, or if you're seeing a painted lady, and some years you get huge invasions of these species, particularly painted ladies, Butterfly Conservation really want to know about it. So thinking about moths, there are again a couple of different moth projects that you can get involved with. I should say, the clue's in the name, but the hummingbird hawk moth is a moth. So there's a garden moth scheme. If you are someone that's got a moth trap, it might be something you're interested in doing. So it's a commitment, ideally, to trap in your garden once a week and get data about the different moths that are coming in. And moths are a wonderful group. So there's about 2,500 of them. They're changing throughout the year, and they're incredibly beautiful, interesting, and important species. And then every year, Butterfly Conservation run a national moth night. So this year their theme, so they change it every year, and it's not the same time every year. Their theme's going to be on reed beds and wetlands. So there should, obviously COVID allowing, be lots of different events happening around that sort of time to go out and look for these special moths of reed beds and wetlands. And again, it's easy, with 2,500 moths and 59 species of butterflies, it's quite easy to have those what the hell is it moments. And you might actually look at this list and think that it looks kind of familiar, and that's because these are exactly the same things that you would look out for with a bird, because actually, again, looking at the shape, the way it's holding its wings, which can be different for different species of moths and different species of butterflies, looking again the size, what it's doing, the habitat, the time of year, and of course the markings and the patterning. All of these things are going to be the things that help point you in the direction of working out what that species is. And again, if you can, do take photos, because you can generally work out most of these species from a photo. Not always, sometimes you fall down, but it's always worth trying. So a couple of places that can be really useful where you can get some really good help are one of them. Again, if you're into apps, there is a specific I Record Butterflies app, and that's got lots of really useful information on there, and it has sort of phenology, so the different flight seasons for these different species. Butterfly conservation has got lots of useful information about species, their life cycles, lots of photos for you can compare your own photos to. They also have something called first sightings, which is really useful. So if you see a butterfly in March and you think, oh, would that be a brown hair streak? And you're not sure, you can go on to Butterfly Conservation's website and see that, oh no, actually, brown hair streaks are Britain's laziest butterfly and they don't emerge till July. That was something else. If you're very competitive, you can kind of, in the next few weeks, when we start seeing orange tips and holly blues, you can kind of see your first one and dash onto the website and say, did I see it? Did I see the first one in the UK? You've got a good chance being in Sussex. And then UK Butterflies has got some really, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called, I don't know, confusion species or something. There's a really useful part on their website that actually compares the similar species and gives you clues as to how you can separate them. So that's another really useful thing to look out for. And again, I mean, there are millions of field guides for butterflies and moths. You know, there's, whether you're a lover of photos or a lover of illustrations, there'll be something out there. Again, the FSC have got some fantastic guides, so these fold out ones, and then there's some quite comprehensive ones as well if you're going over to Europe. So there's lots and lots of different ones to have a look for. And this is what you'll find in them. So there's a whole series of natural history books, so not just butterflies and moths, dragonflies, all sorts of different things, bees, that have been illustrated by a fantastic illustrator called Richard Lewington. And you'll find that the illustrations are very good. They tend to show you the species in the pose that you're likely to find it. They are either life size for the sort of macro moths, the bigger moths, or they'll be 1.5, 2 times life size for the smaller moths, just so you can see the details more easily. And these are a fantastic resource, and it is really nice for doing what I've done here, kind of doing that picture matching thing. I would say it's really important. It's so tempting, and we've all done it, to have your photo or your moth in a pot and kind of get it and compare it to the book and say, yeah, that pretty much looks like the same thing. I'm just going to say, and I mean this in the gentlest way, books have words for a reason. So please do read what the words say as well, because you may find that you're kind of like trying to lump it into something that it isn't, that's not actually flying at that time of year, or that's only known of from Scotland. If you really think that you're convinced that you're right, then ask for a second opinion. But yeah, do always read the text, because there's some very useful information that you can't get from the picture. There are some other really useful websites as well for moth identification. So there's a fantastic website called UK Moths, so you can search your species, you can get lots of photos of it, you can get photos of it in different life stages. There's also something very useful which is called Flying Tonight. So obviously with 2,500 species, that's quite a daunting book to flick through if you don't really know where to begin. So actually, if you find a moth and you're not sure what it is, go to Flying Tonight and it will tell you what is generally recorded at this time of year, and that will narrow down your search a lot. So this is a screenshot from Flying Tonight for July. So you can see that's going to really help you to work out what it might be. And then Sussex Moth Group is another really good resource. So Sussex Moth Group have got all of the moths that have been recorded in Sussex. There's an information page on them, which is really useful if you think you've seen a species or if you want to see a species. So if, for example, I want to see an old lady in Sussex, how do I even start? Where am I going to find an old lady in Sussex? So I can look at Sussex Moth Group website and look at, well, where have other people seen old ladies? And there's a map here. So all of the old ladies in Sussex are on this map. And then I can think, well, what time of year do people usually see old ladies? And look, here we go. There's a map here, a graph here that tells me when old ladies are usually seen. So there's lots of really useful information like that. that you can find on Sussex Moth Group's website. And then again, if you're really kind of intrigued by moths, there's lots of other ways you can record them. So you can record them and butterflies as well, as caterpillars. There are some absolutely stunning things out there. This turns into quite a drab brown moth, but this is an absolutely stunning caterpillar called the lackey. And this also, I mean, it's clearly a leaf, but it's also a moth. So this is something called Kent bentwing. And there are lots of resources, again, if you kind of find yourself quite intrigued by these leaf mining insects, there's this fantastic website here that can help you identify it. You do need to know what the plant is that the mine is in, but actually it can really help you to work out and to find lots of other species. There's also a field guide for caterpillars, and there's this wonderful book which actually tells you which things to look out month by month. So a little bit about pollinating insects now, because there are a few recording schemes that you can contribute records of pollinating insects. I am going to point out right now, because I'd be remiss if I didn't, that moths and butterflies are also important pollinating insects. So, but because we've just talked about them, I'm going to focus more on flies, bees, wasps. So there are a few different schemes that you can get involved with. So the first one is the Hoverfly recording scheme. This is done by a Facebook group, and they're incredibly friendly and incredibly helpful. The nice thing about hoverflies, it's not true for every single species, but a lot of them, you can identify them from a photo. Sometimes the photo has to be from the right angle, but actually the group is incredibly supportive. So if you found a hoverfly, you got some photos of it, but you weren't really sure what it is, if you post it on there, you'll find it's a very welcoming community, and they will try and help you to identify it. And if they can't, you know, it's not the end of the world, but they will certainly give it a try. So that's definitely something to look out for if you're on Facebook. There is a scheme called Bee Walks. So if bumblebees are really your bag, this is a bumblebee monitoring scheme. And again, this is one of these transects, so these linear routes where you would be recording, I can't remember, I think it's a couple of meters or maybe 5 meters again, either side of you, and walking it ideally once a month between March and October, identifying the bees that you were seeing and counting the number of them. And again, with all of these things, it's just your best efforts that you can do. And actually for things like, there are two very similar species called the white-tailed bumblebee and the buff-tailed bumblebee, and for those you're not necessarily going to be able to separate them in flight. In fact, it's incredibly difficult, particularly with the workers, and the scheme knows that. So it is designed to kind of take these things into account. Again, this is a national scheme, and it's gathering really important data about bumblebees and how their abundance and distribution is changing and how the population is changing over time. So through the data that they've gathered nationally, they've already identified that bumblebees are moving in response to climate change, but actually they don't seem to be moving consistently. So they're not expanding northwards as quickly as they're contracting southwards, and they're having this kind of compression. They don't really understand why, but it's really important, like I said, to be identifying these things, because then we can start to think, okay, like we need to do something here. There is another scheme which is quite a new one on the block. So this was established in 2017, which is called the UK Pollinator Monitoring Scheme. And there are two aspects to this, but the kind of easiest one, the most straightforward one, is to do what's called a flower insect timed count. And I mean, really, you couldn't think of something lovelier to do, because you need to pick a nice sunny warm day and spend 10 minutes watching flowers. I mean, you can spend longer. I would definitely recommend spending longer. And basically what you're looking for is a 50 centimetre by 50 centimetre square, and it's a patch that is made up of predominantly one flower species, and there's a list of flower species to use. It includes all of the species that pollinators love, so things like dandelions, things like white dead nettles, things like brambles, hogweed, ragwort, knapweed, all of those kind of things. There's a full list that you can find, and you just basically sit there and you just look at who's coming and who's hanging out, and again, you record to the level of your ability. So it may be that you're happy to say, that's a bumblebee, that's a solitary bee, or it may just be that, well, that's a bee, and that's fine. It's all data that is helpful for the people at the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. So again, I mean, I'm not gonna pretend that bees are the easiest species to identify, because that wouldn't be being correct or fair, but it's possible, and particularly things like bumblebees. And there is some very useful information on the Bumblebee Conservation Trust website to help you identify your species. Bug Life has some useful information. And another thing I'd highly recommend looking at if you're interested in bees or flies, and actually a lot of other insects too. There's a very fantastic entomologist called Stephen Falk, who has been incredibly generous with his time and spent a lot of time curating a Flickr page. And he has lots of useful information, lots of photographs of different species, and lots of really helpful tips that you can compare your photos to. There's Facebook recording groups, like I mentioned, for hoverflies, soldier flies, all sorts of different groups. And then there's an organisation called Bee Wars, the Bees, Wasps and Ants Recording Society, that gives you information about distributions and when different species of bees, wasps and ants are around. There's tons of books. So a couple of these books I've put on here, actually, Dave Goulson and Erica McAllister's books, are more, I think, if you kind of think, well, I might be interested in bees, I'm not quite sure, I'm feeling a bit coy about it, I just want to know more about their ecology. Dave Goulson, he's done a really good job of actually giving fantastic overviews of their ecology, and hopefully will encourage you to go out and find out more and record more. Again, I'm just going to reiterate what I was saying about moths in particular. It is super tempting to do the picture matching thing. I think you kind of need to realise that you're not going to necessarily be able to identify every single species. There are certain species of bees that you're only going to be able to identify under a microscope. So you don't have to rush out and buy a microscope, but it's just kind of being aware of that. So not being too disappointed if you can't get it to species level, but if you can still say, well, I know that it's some kind of Andrena bee, that's still a useful record. And if you can photograph it, it might be that someone can help identify it. So the last group that I'm going to talk about is mammals. And again, there are a few different mammal surveys that you can get involved with that you can see there. So I'll talk about these different surveys. So the first one is something, this is quite a sort of ad hoc informal survey called Mammal Mapper. And again, if you're really into apps, you can download an app, and then basically anytime you go for a walk, a run, a cycle, a drive, without you driving, someone else driving, you can basically be mapping all of the mammals or signs of mammals that you see along the way. And they do really want you to also record null results. So if you go out for that walk and you don't see any mammals, it's actually also really useful for them to know that. If you're regularly walking a particular area, that can be really useful data. And also it's like, again, a miniature sort of mammal version of iRecord. So you're building up this kind of legacy of where you've been and what you've seen. So that's something to kind of have a look out for if you're interested in mammals. There's a survey run by an organisation called PTS, which is called Living with Mammals, which they run periodically. And this is particularly focused on urban mammals. So they're particularly interested in the mammals that people are seeing within 200 metres of a building. So it might be in your garden, or it might be in a local park that's sort of in close proximity to houses and other buildings. And again, they're just asking you to go out and have a look for the mammals or the signs of mammals that you see, because realistically with mammal recording, a lot of it we're looking at nests, footprints or dung. You might be lucky enough to see the mammal itself. So there will be more information coming soon onto the PTS website, because that survey is starting in a few weeks at the end of March. So there's also a harvest mouse survey, which the Mammal Society will be running again in the autumn. And this is basically going out looking for harvest mouse nests. So having a look in sort of long grass and finding these beautiful woven nests that the harvest mouse creates. So again, that's sort of something to have a look out for in the autumn, and you should hopefully see some publicity around that closer to the time. It's a really lovely sort of survey to be involved with. There's also quite a lot of hedgehog related surveys that you can get involved with. Again, you can have a look on the PTES website or on the Hedgehog Street website, and you can find different ways to get involved. So there's one thing called the big hedgehog map, which is recording where you've seen hedgehogs, and also recording where you've created gaps in your fence. So one of the problems that hedgehogs and lots of other species have is that we constantly put barriers in their way. So actually putting fences up prohibits lots of species from moving through gardens, and it's really bad news for them. So Hedgehog Street is encouraging people to put little holes in the base of their fence so that the hogs can squeeze through. And actually, if you've got one of these holes, the big hedgehog map would love to know, because it's really useful to kind of see where there are communities doing exciting things and positive things for hedgehogs. Another one to draw your attention to, it's the slightly sort of sad sort of scale of hedgehog recording, and a lot of my hedgehog records unfortunately are dead hedgehogs on roads. So there is a survey called Mammals on Roads, which tends to happen during the summer months, which is when youngsters are dispersing. This is not just about hedgehogs, this is any dead mammals that you're seeing on roads, and I know, I see lots of polecats, foxes, all sorts of things dead on the road. It's thought it's about 150,000 hedgehogs that are killed on the roads every year, and it will be lots of tens of thousands of other mammals as well. And for things like hedgehogs, whose numbers are quite low now, this could have a significant impact on their population. So again, capturing this information, although it's not necessarily nice to see, it's really important data. And then just a little bit about bats, because bats are mammals too, and they're wonderful mammals at that. There is something called the National Bat Monitoring Programme, and there are quite a few different surveys that you can get involved with. And you don't have to have a huge knowledge of bats, you don't have to have a fancy bat detector. So if you just wanted to contribute still some useful information, there's something called the Sunrise Sunset Survey. And basically what you're sort of asked to do is to just help out with an hour immediately post dusk, or an hour pre-dawn, which is beautiful time anyway, because the birds will also be starting to sing. And you're just looking out for bats flying around, and you're looking out potentially for bats emerging from a tree or a building, or going back in early in the morning. And you don't need a detector to do that. If you have one, it will definitely add to the fun, but you don't need one. You can also do roost camps. So if you know that you've got bats in your house, or you know that your neighbours have got bats, or you know there's bats in the church or wherever, you can actually do a roost count. So you can go there. So the recommendation is kind of during June, and actually stand and count how many bats come out of the roost. And again, that's really useful information. Again, a bat detector will add to it, because it can help you to identify what species it is. So that's something, all of these are on the Bat Conservation Trust website. And there's something else called the Waterway Survey. So this is specifically to look out for a bat called the Dorbenton's bat, which is a lovely bat with big hairy feet that trawls insects off of the surface of the water. And it kind of looks like a big flying barrel, well, a little flying barrel. It's quite a chunky little thing. And it has a very characteristic flight, very low over the water. So again, people are asked to go out and survey big water bodies, rivers, to have a look for these feeding Dorbenton's bats. And there are others. There are woodland surveys, there are countryside surveys. There's all sorts of different ones to get involved with. So if bats are your bag, then please do go and have a look for that. So although I've told you about recording a few of many recording schemes, I just want to kind of come back onto one thing, just to say that ad hoc recording is important too. You might kind of feel, maybe at this point you're not ready, you don't have the time, you're a little bit hesitant about getting involved in a monitoring scheme, but actually, don't walk past something like this. Look at that, all that juicy frog spawn and toad spawn. If you see that, pop a record in. You've just said a lot with 5 minutes worth of effort. Now we know there's 2 species of amphibians breeding there. That's fantastic. And like I said, you're contributing to these long-term pictures, which are super critical for conservation. So I'm just going to finish off with a couple of thoughts really. And one of the key ones, I think, is if this is something that's new to you, that's fine. Just be patient with yourself. When you're learning something new, it is hard, it takes time, you'll make mistakes along the way. don't take yourself too seriously, just enjoy it. Sometimes you're not going to know what something is, and that's totally fine. That's what books are for, that's what Facebook forums are for, that's what other ecologists are for, that's what county recorders for. So don't be ashamed to say that you don't know, don't be ashamed to ask. You know, use it as an opportunity to connect with other people, and do enjoy it. It is kind of fun when you find something and you don't have a clue what it is, to kind of go through this process of trying to figure it out. So like I said, try not to kind of fall into that temptation of sort of squeezing it into, well, it almost looks like that picture, if only that bit was green and not red. Just kind of see if there's other people around that can help you. I do really want to encourage you by saying that the more that you do this, the more you kind of work this muscle of learning about species, the easier it's going to become. And I use this picture, or these 4 pictures, because I kind of want to illustrate a point. So I have never seen any of these 4 species. These are 4 North American species. But you know what? If I was in North America, I would know exactly where to go in the ID guide, because I recognize them. You know, these are, you can see what they are from other things that you know. I know what a bumblebee looks like in the UK, so I know that's a bumblebee. I don't know what one, not yet, but what I mean to say is that the more you kind of look at this, the easier it becomes, because actually it's intimidating having a massive field guide, but actually once you start to recognize that that's some kind of a primrose, you've now got 5 pages to look at and not 200. It gets so much easier. So that's just kind of, hopefully, just to kind of really encourage you to just kind of keep going, and just sort of persevere. And then a few kind of next steps that might be useful for you. So maybe think about signing up to Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre's newsletter. If you're interested in species recording, they'll send out information about surveys and resources. You can get yourself an iRecord account. I really love mine. It's really useful to see what I've seen, where I've seen it. It's really useful to be able to go back into my historic data. There are loads of Sussex-based recording groups as well as national groups, so you can see just a selection of them here. They will organise all sorts of things, events, talks, lots of different things. When we're all allowed to go out and see each other again, there'll be field events. So you can join up with different groups and find out, you know, find the group that does the thing that you're most interested in. There's other apps, so you can download, you know, the butterfly app, there's ladybird apps, grasshopper apps, all sorts of different things. But my kind of really key thing, I really like, do go out there, do immerse yourself in this stuff. It's really good for you. Nature needs you, wildlife needs you, but you need nature as well. So take the time to get to know it, take the time to respect it, take the time to record it, because it's really useful for conservation. And that is the end, with a beautiful hawfinch who wants to rip your face off, because that's what they do. I'm going to stop sharing now and say thank you for listening. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions about anything.
Well, first of all, I can just say on behalf of everybody, Laurie, that we're somewhat overwhelmed at the sheer amount of information you've given us there. Absolutely fantastic, and the photographs are just mind-blowing. So many of them, and so many of them are yours, I see. It's worth just mentioning that we have been recording the session, which means that we can then put it up on our HKD. Have got a YouTube channel, so I'm sure some people are going to be tempted to run back through this just to sort of dig out some of that incredible detail you've just given us. So it'll take perhaps a week or so before it'll appear on the YouTube channel, but it will be there in time. Right, so if anybody would like to ask a question of Laurie, remember you need to unmute yourself before we can hear you.
Hey Trudy, you're unmuted already, I can see.
Yes, I am. I just unmuted myself in preparation. Just going back to I had no idea that the hummingbird, hawk moths and painted ladies were migrants.
Yeah, we've got loads of migrant species, loads of migrant moths. Red admirals, migrants as well, large whites, small whites, loads of them.
That's just incredible. What? Because I know that you can actually you can order painted lady pupa by post and have them, you know, and have them.
You can. There's lots of things you can do, whether you should.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of it's kind of what I meant. I mean, does that skew the results? I mean, if people suddenly see an influx of.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, to be honest, Trudy, that wouldn't be my main concern with that. Like, it will to some extent. I don't think there's people doing it, hopefully, in big enough volume. My bigger concern with things like that, actually moving species around, is the classic way that we get problems with disease and parasites. You know, like, look at amphibians, people moving amphibians around, and it moves, and things like bumblebees. So Bombus terrestris, the buff-tailed bumblebee that we see a lot, is moved around as a pollinator in glass houses, but actually a lot of the Bombus terrestris that are brought in come from often Southeast Europe, and they're actually a different subspecies. But if you're going to be a real purist about it, subspecies are on the way to becoming species. It's, you know, and species can move, but actually a bumblebee is not going to get here from Greece or Turkey or, you know, where a lot of these are coming from, and they can carry diseases. So yeah, I wouldn't be worried so much about it skewing the results. And I think it is a really, I think it's a really important thing and a really lovely thing to capture children's interest, to see that cycle. But actually, you know, I've got an accidental orange tip at the moment. I didn't mean to have an orange tip chrysalis, but I have one because it pupated, it come off some cuckoo flower and pupated on something, and it's now in my windowsill, and I'm hoping it will emerge soon. But I mean, a friend of mine has done this with his children. They find chrysalis and they rear them through. And I think, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't advocate going and buying some personally.
It goes against my, it's something that I would do, but you know,
I mean, it's hard because it's a lovely thing to see and they're fascinating. Like, at every stage they're fascinating, but I think I just kind of consider it a privilege when you come across those things naturally, and then rather than sort of going on eBay or Amazon or whatever.
Okay.
Was that the crux of your question, Trudy? Was that all right?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, cool. Cynthia, you've got a question?
Yeah. Does the Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre supply records to the National Biological Records Centre with the UKCEH?
Yeah, so they do data share. They data exchange. They data exchange with all of the national recording schemes. Well done, Anne. Anne's getting apps. But what I would say actually is, if I want data, I go to Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre. I don't go to NBN. NBN don't have as much data. They don't have the data at the same resolution. I would always go to Essex BRC.
It depends. Some of the data sets in NBN are very detailed, just the same.
Some of them are, but there's huge gaps in what they hold. So Sussex Biodiversity Record
that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, so they data share with the national schemes. So they share their data with, you know, the Mammal Group. They share their data with Bee Wars. They swap data. So like when I'm dormouse monitoring, my data goes to PTS nationally, but PTS share that with Sussex Biodiversity Record Centre, so they have it. But yeah, I think NBN, they have some of the data, but they don't have it at as fine a scale. I would always go to the local record centre.
You can get the finer scale if you go directly rather than through the website.
Yeah, but there are big gaps in their data.
The reason I'm asking is because we don't always stay in Sussex. So if you're on holiday somewhere and you wanted to know what was around, you wouldn't go to Sussex Biodiversity Centre.
No, you'd go to the record centre for the county you're in.
Either the county or the national one.
Yeah, I would always go to the local level personally before I went to the national level. Yeah,
it is
but
important.
It's different. Every county is different. I mean, we are very lucky. I've worked with quite a few local record centres in Sussex. I'm not just saying it because I live in Sussex and I know some of the people that work there. It is a very good record centre. They're very proactive. They've done some really good things with the data. And I think the more that we can contribute to that, the better.
And just as a point of interest, it's no longer just CEH, it's the UK CEH.
Oh, okay, thank you.
It's been updated very recently. It's been privatised, but it's still doing national work.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Any other questions?
I do have another one, actually, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Just in relation to the Big Garden Birdwatch, why is it just, I mean, obviously there's the BTO one, which is weekly, but the RSPB one, why at the end of January? Why just once a year, and why at that time?
I think part of it, I mean, so a lot of these kind of things they're about data, but they're also about getting more people involved in biological recording, more people noticing wildlife. And I think you know, a lot of people are focused on birds in the winter. They're feeding birds in their garden. It's also quite a nice thing to do in the, you know, the bleak days of January. Yeah, I think that's why they do it then, because part of it is about public engagement. But equally, you know, I can't remember when they put their reports out. Is it sort of April time usually? Because they'll be crunching all that data at the moment. You know, that data does always then come out the other side, and you do get those useful, they're just kind of indicative trends. But there are, you know, there are other national, you know, there's other sort of bird surveys. I haven't told you about all of them because there's a lot of them. There are other ones, you know, if you're more kind of getting more confident in your bird identification, and particularly like songs and calls, there are transect surveys that you can do as well. There's wetland bird counts, there's all sorts of things. But yeah, I think part of it is because it is a kind of community engagement thing as well, and just a nice thing in the winter. People are more likely to be at home, less likely to be off wherever. So yeah.
Thank you.
That's all right. Hi, Juliet.
I did the Big Garden Birdwatch this year for the first time ever, having meant often to do it before. And it was incredibly annoying because I left it till the Sunday afternoon and it poured with rain.
Yeah.
All the birds that I know are in my garden were hiding.
It's the skill of wildlife, Juliet. This is it always happens that way. And when I do my breeding bird survey, it's like as soon as I finish it, I'll see like a pair of red kites, and I'll see, you know, I'll see a marsh tit or something, you know, like it's just what it is. But maybe next year.
Maybe next year. I also wanted to put in a plug for invertebrates.
Good.
Having last done biology when I was 16 and being completely ignorant about all this kind of stuff, a few years ago we started a herring stream survey group that Cynthia is also part of, that's just monitoring the health of the herring stream through the village of Sussex. And up until the beginning of lockdown, we were doing surveys, quarterly surveys at 2 sites in the village. And I found it completely amazing and fascinating. You get a bucket of what looks like muddy water.
And there's stuff in it.
There's stuff in it, and it's moving around, and it's exotic stuff when you look at it. Small. I mean, it was.
Yeah. I mean, small stuff's the best because you magnify it, and it's suddenly just like, oh my god, like look at that thing.
Caddisflies. I mean, who knew that caddisflies have such amazing structures that they create out of bits?
Really cool. Yeah.
It was fun. So I just to echo what you were saying about enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, that's the thing, isn't it? It's hopefully the more that people are going out there and enjoying things, because this is not our planet, we're sharing it, you know. We just like to push our weight around, but there's lots of other things that we're living with, and actually the more we can get to know them and actually sort of understand them, the more we can hopefully help them. So anyone else got any other I don't know who race to unmute yourself. Okay,
can I just ask a question? If you wanted to, like, I've got grandchildren, I'd love to involve them a bit more, but if there was an app that was sort of user friendly for children, is there one that springs to mind?
How old are they?
Oh, 5 and 7 at the moment.
I mean,
you with them?
Yeah, I mean, so there are some really nice ones. I mean, a lot of them, you know, like the butterfly one, so there's a ladybird one. They are really nice because they do have lots of photos and illustrations, and the grasshopper one's a really lovely one because that also has the songs, and of course as children they'll be able to hear them really well, because unfortunately, you know, as you get older there's a chance you'll lose the ability to hear grasshoppers and crickets, but you can actually do a little kind of like trying to sort of look at what it is with the picture, but you can play the song as well so they can work out if it sounds like what they think it is. Yeah, I don't know of any that are specifically designed for children, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. It might be, I mean, it may be worth a quick inquiry to the Wildlife Trust's Wild Call, because if there is, if you email their Wild Call service, I bet they'll know if there is one. There may well be, but yeah, I mean, a lot of them I think they are pretty user friendly, sort of nice, and yeah, lots of information to help with your ID.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, good luck. I hope they enjoy it. Fred, hello.
Hello, Laurie. Thanks very much. I was horrified by that early graph, of course, the farmland bird drop.
Yeah.
Are there any positive signs in the foreseeable future?
So there are, for some of the species, the declines have slowed, and it's not I mean, so that's basically looking at the 19 species together. If you kind of split it out, there's basically specialist species within that and generalist species, and it's the specialist species that are sort of harder hit. There are lots of positive things going on farmland, not unfortunately consistently yet, but there are, you know, that around on the downs, particularly if you go west of us, there's some really good stuff happening for farmland birds, and there are some areas where things like corn buntings and grey partridge are doing pretty well now. But yeah, we're definitely not out of the woods by any means, and unfortunately as a group, yeah, there's still a lot of them are still declining. The problem is when the populations get smaller, they become more vulnerable, of course, as well. There has been a lot of work, and there continues to be a lot of work that goes into farmland bird conservation, and with sort of kind of understand what needs to happen, it's sort of getting it done, and part of that is around having, I suppose, the incentives. Well, it's having the carrot and the stick in terms of working with farmers, but there are, I mean, I've worked with some farmers on the Downs, the South Downs and the North Downs. There are some doing really good things. I think unfortunately you kind of often get this blanket opinion that farmers are awful and they're not doing anything good, and it's not true. There are some that are doing really good things. It is, you know, a lot of it is land use change because of agriculture that's caused this, but so yeah, it's mixed. I would say there's some good things happening. I'd like to see them happen more widely, because some species aren't responding, or not, the declines aren't slowing, not as much as we'd like, and they're certainly not turning around. Yeah, there's, I mean, all of you can look at the reports every year are on the BTO's and RSPB's website, so you can kind of drill down into the details. But there was certainly the last Birds of Conservation Concern, I think that review's done every 4 or 5 years. There were birds that were effectively downgraded, so they went from red to amber or amber to green, which is great. Unfortunately, more went the other way, which isn't great. So yeah, it's all a work in progress, and like everything, we need to do more. Yeah.
I'm tempted to ask the follow-up question: is the exit from Europe a positive or negative in this context? Will we be losing?
Very clever in this context. It's very difficult. So pragmatically, in theory, the exit from Europe presented us with an opportunity to reframe the way in which we do agricultural policy, personally, I don't think we've taken it. There was a lot of very promising noises, but there's a lot of quite disheartening things happening, like, you know, the Environment Bill reading being pushed back and all these kind of things. I think it's a little bit too early to say. And you know, a lot of our species protection, site protection came via a European directive, which has all kind of been, or is in the process of being pushed over into UK law. But personally, I think it leaves us incredibly vulnerable. Yeah, I personally don't think it was great news for conservation and many other things. But let's not get political.
No.
Any other questions? Oh, Tina. Oh, you're still muted, Tina. Oh, yeah. Oh, try again. Oh, you're still muted, Tina. John, oh, there you go.
There we go. I've done it. Yeah, I'd just like to say, it's not really a question, but you introduced me to iRecord on I think it was at the White Horse, one of the HKD.
Cool, okay.
Ago it was, but I've been using it ever since, and I found it great.
Do you enjoy it?
I really enjoy it, and I put all sorts on there, everything.
Yeah.
If I can identify it, but even when I can't and I get it wrong, which I do sometimes.
It happens to the best of us, Tina.
Yeah, the recorders are really good, and they'll put on a suggestion as to what it is, especially if you've got a photograph.
Yeah,
so it's really good. It's just great.
Yeah.
Because, and also you can just click on, you don't need to do grid referencing, which makes life so much easier.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Oh, that's good. I'm
thank you.
Adopted it. Cool, thank you. There we go. That's an advertisement for all of you non-iRecord users. And I haven't bribed Tina or anything.
No.
Laurie, I'd have to say though that if we followed all the things that we could be doing on a sort of regular basis that you told us about, there'd be no time left, would there? We'd be sort of a full-time job.
And John, I only told you about probably 1/10 of them. I mean, there's lots to be involved in. And yeah, I mean, realistically, of course, everyone has priorities, everyone has stuff going on. I think really it's just to kind of emphasize that, like, where you can, you know, you don't have to suddenly like take on 5 breeding bird survey squares or anything like that. But you know what, if you've got a house sparrow nesting in your garden, then just, it takes 5 minutes. In fact, not even 5 minutes, Tina, does it?
No, it doesn't. No, it's really quick. Yeah, it's really easy to use. Yeah.
And it's so helpful. Like I said, with focusing resources and conservation, there aren't enough resources, and actually having some insight as to where is the best place to use them is so helpful. So it does give people like me a really good idea of where to start. So thank you to all of you who are recording, and please think about recording if you haven't or aren't at the moment. Any other questions before we wrap up?
Well, I think we're all very grateful, Laurie. That was absolutely fabulous, and so much information. And as I mentioned before, those wonderful photographs.
I'm very lucky to have seen some very cool wildlife. but it's all out there to be found, apart from those North American ones.
And it does rather come across as quite a passion of yours, all this wildlife. But
yes, it is. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I think we better wrap up now. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. As I say, this HKD YouTube account will have this, if you want to run back through it again or tell your friends about it to watch. And I'm not sure about our next date for one of these lockdown lounges. I think we've had a rush of them just lately, and I think we've got a bit of a lull now before the next one.
I don't think we've got a date in for one yet, but we've got a few ideas. So yeah, keep looking out for those.
Well, thanks again. Okay,
All
well,
right.
so bye-bye to everybody. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks very much, everyone. See you later.